Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the third webinar of the MESEO project. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Jessica from Resolvo, partner of the MESEO project and your moderator for today. Some of you may have been here already for our previous webinars, so welcome back. To those that are newcomers here today, welcome to you as well. Our first webinar went through the different elements of our MESEO system, which is a prototype of a digital ecosystem, which is designed to improve performance in the different steps in the satellite data processing chain. This system would allow an end user to request specific satellite data depending on their needs, and the Central Coordination Centre would assess the request and activate a function that can provide data in the most appropriate form. So our second webinar looked instead at a concrete example of the type of data request that we might expect to receive, in that case looking specifically at methane emissions. Our focus today is a second data request example, that of crop classification. Crop classification is required to inform policymakers, businesses or farms about what crops are being grown, where they're being grown, and what quantities. This is information that can be used to support decision on topics as wide as food security, farm management, efficient resource use, and environmental monitoring. Satellites can help us with this. They can capture images, they can track changes, they can map patterns. And I am very happy that our MESEO partner, Dr. Andrea Miola from the University of Ferrara, is here to tell you more about this. Andrea is from the Department of Physics, and he's working on scientific applications that can exploit big data, AI techniques, and cloud computing. He is going to explain to you how our MESEO system leverages AI and also satellite data to enhance this crop classification accuracy and efficiency. His presentation will last for about 25 minutes, and then we will turn to your questions and you'll have the chance to find out more. You can write your questions directly in the chat. Please make sure that you write them to everybody so that everybody can see them. And when Andrea's finished, we'll deal with your questions in the Q&A session after he's finished. So for now, Andrea, it's great to have you here. Over to you for your talk.
Okay. Thank you, Jessica, for your kind introduction. I'm Andrea. I'm a postdoc researcher at the University of Ferrara. And today I will speak about the third webinar of MESEO, which is about mapping agriculture, the AI and satellite technologies for crop classification, and how we are integrating these kind of technologies inside the MESEO program. So for who wasn't here in the previous webinars, and this is just a small reminder of what MESEO is. So MESEO is a European project that aims to design, prototype, and demonstrate an open, flexible, and scalable multi-mission Earth observation end-to-end system. This will be used for massive data processing. So we aim to being able to integrate data from different satellites and process them all together in the same Earth Observation Coordination Center. Additionally, we plan to exploit AI techniques in both on both the on-ground functions and also the onboard functions in the satellite. The MESEO project is a joint collaboration of 9 different partners. We also have an advisory board, the advisory board members that provide feedback to the partners about the work that we are currently doing. And in particular, we, as the University of Ferrara, together with Sistema, are in charge of developing the Green Deal applications. In this case, we are developing two thematic processors. One is the methane detection classificator that was discussed in the previous webinar, and us, as the University of Ferrara, are in charge of developing the crop classification processor. In particular, here we can see the schematic workflow of MESEO. It is divided in 2 main segments. We have the ground segment and the space segment. In the ground segment, we have 2 different components, which are the Earth Observation Coordination Center and the PGS. In particular, the Earth Observation Coordination Center contains all the ground processing functions and all the thematic use case processors from which the user interact. The end user interact with the EOCC, provides his request, and the EOCC, depending on the request and on the type of service that is required, elevates the request to the PDGS and so to the space segment to perform the acquisition and then retrieve them to perform the analysis of the data. In this optic, the crop classification thematic processor is used to demonstrate the processing capabilities of the Earth Observation Coordination Center for processing data from a catalog, because unlike the methane detection application, we are not able to, it is not possible to process data from a single observation. So what we have to do is to observe the same area for several iterations along a given period of time, acquire all the data, store them in a database, and then when the end user requests the data from a certain area, the Earth Observation Coordination Center pass the data to the thematic processor, and this processor will analyze the data and give the end results to the user. So this was just an overview of what MESEO is doing and how we are introducing our application. Now we will move to describe why it is important to perform crop classification. So about the scientific topic. Well, crop classification is important in the scope of land cover monitoring because different countries, the various countries and agencies have several needs about knowing what and where different crops are growing. This is especially in response to know how the farmers are reacting to climate change events, so also to disasters, for example, extreme weather events, and also to assess how the food security of a given nation or of a given area is faring. To do this, in the last decades, there have been a significant change in the scope of land cover monitoring. In fact, we moved from ground surveys to mainly ground surveys to using also satellite observations, because they provide a cost-effective data, because we do not need to fly the same instrument over the same area multiple times, because the satellite is in orbit, and for this reason it orbits over the same area several times during its orbit. They also provide multispectral sensors, so we can observe the same area in different wavelengths, and satellites are able to observe large areas at the same time. For this reason, several missions have been issued in the last decades. We have both private companies with commercial activities doing with satellites, for example, JSAT from our partners Atlantis, but also there are public missions. For example, we have the Copernicus Initiative, Sentinel-1, Sentinel-2 satellites, but there is also Landsat, for example. But the use of satellites is not always easy, because as we know, we cannot observe single crops from a satellite, because we do not have infinite resolution. We have to, what we observe is data with a specific resolution, for example, 2 to 60 meters for the most recent satellites. And so we receive the reflectance values from an area on the ground. From these, we observe a spectrum. And what we know is that different crops can present spectral similarities during the stage of their growth. So it is not actually easy to distinguish between similar crops. Additionally, one important problem that affects especially optic satellites and sensors is the presence of clouds, because clouds can significantly hinder the quality of the images, because we do not know what is below the cloud. To process this kind of information, and to produce crop maps, we are using a computer vision technique called image segmentation. And And different type of image segmentation technique exist. We have from the simplest one, which is semantic image segmentation, where all the pixels of an image are assigned a different label corresponding to the class that they belong to. For example, in the picture below, we can see that we have different classes for the person class and the car class, but we do not distinguish between the two person or the two cars. Then we have instance segmentation, where all the pixels of a given object are assigned a certain label. So we distinguish between all the objects in the image, but we do not know if they are people or cars. And finally, we have also the panoptic segmentation, which is a mixture of the two previous methods. For our needs, we are okay with using only semantic image segmentation. And what we plan to do is moving from one observation of this kind and achieving something like the one we're seeing on the right, where all the pixels of the fields of a certain whose crop belong to a certain class are assigned a certain label. To do this, we are using artificial neural networks frameworks that, for who doesn't know what a neural network is, which is difficult for the moment because everybody more or less uses ChatGPT and similar instruments. Well, artificial neural networks are mathematical features, algorithms that are modeled around how the human brain learns patterns. They're structured around the mathematical concept of the artificial neuron, which is modeled on the brain neuron. This is a structure that takes in input one feature and analyzes it and produces an output. And when organized in different layers, we achieve what is called an artificial neural network. In the picture below, we can see an example of the simplest architecture possible for a neural network called multi-layer perceptron, where we have at least 3 layers. An input layer where all the neurons are connected to all the features in the input, an output layer that collects all the output from the previous layers and creates a final output, and then at least one hidden layer in between where all the neurons are connected between all the previous layers neuron and the next layer neurons. As we can see, the number of connections is extremely high, and for this reason, it is not extremely efficient to use this kind of networks for complex inputs, like, for example, images, because as we know, even simple images in RGB scale are an extremely complex input because they are three-dimensional matrices. For this reason, in 1998, LeCun proposed the concept of the convolution operation, which is at the core of the convolutional neural network, where we have basically a filter that is sliding over the image, performing dot products over the image and creating the convolution, the convolved feature. And this is what basically we use for this application. Okay, moving to what we have done. We started analyzing the literature to know how we could perform crop classification. What we learned was that it was extremely difficult to perform crop classification with a high level of accuracy using only single observation images, single data observations. Because as we can see from the graph below, where it is depicted the evolution of the NDVI index for different crops along the year, it is not easy to train a model on a specific date and expect a differentiation between different classes. For example, if we select a date for a year at around 200 days in the year, so during August, more or less, we cannot discern between the different type of crops. But if we move back to April, for example, we can distinguish pretty well the fruit trees, but we have a significant confusion between cotton and spring maize. So what we learned was that in order to achieve high classification accuracy, we need to perform studies taking into account the full time series growth of the crops. So we are using multispectral, multitemporal data. We searched in the literature and we found 2 publicly available data sets of multitemporal, multispectral data coming from Sentinel-2 observations. And this below is the structure of a small patch that we use in the input as the input feature for training our model. Here we can see that for this feature, for this area, we have the full time series ranging for 1 full year. This is just a sneak peek. And each observation is made by 13 spectral channels. We can see in the RGB stack that represents the full sequence that at least for the border, the field parcels on the border, we can see what seems like an evolution in the colors in the images, meaning that something is happening on ground. And this is what we plan and hope to encapsulate and characterize with our model. So the first data set that we used is called PASTIS, and this it is made by around 2,400 patches with a shape of 128 by 128 pixels, collected from 4 different Sentinel-2 L2A tiles along the French territory. It is made by 10 spectral channels, and each tile was observed between 38 to 61 times during the period that spans from September 2018 to October 2019. Below in the field, in the picture, we can see an example of the patches along with their multi-class ground truth. This ground truth contains 18 crop classes and 1 background. Analyzing this dataset, we noticed that there was one possible source of problems, because the original authors of this dataset did not use orthorectified images. And for this reason, it could be a problem to apply the model trained on non-orthorectified images on other areas, because the orthorectification corrects the images for the terrain effects, making the image like it's flat. So it is possible to apply the model on different areas. So we reconstructed the full data sets from scratch using L2A orthorectified images, and we call this OrthoPastis. And then in the meantime, we also built an L1C version of the dataset, because the second dataset that we used was made using L1C observations. The second dataset is instead based on Munich, in an area around Munich. It contains around 28,000 patches of 48 by 48 pixels, so it is actually smaller. And it contains all 13 spectral channels for Sentinel-2, but we reduced the number to only 7, because from an initial analysis, we deemed not important the other 6 for this kind of data. And it contains up to 52 observations for both 2016 and 2017. For the ground truths, instead, here we have only 17 crop classes and 1 background. Here we can see the full distribution of the crop classes along the 2 datasets. And what we notice is that the 2 datasets contain significantly different classes. This is because different populations have different dietary habits and also different climate. So obviously the importance of the classes are extremely different. What we also notice is that both of these datasets are extremely imbalanced, but there is not much that can be done to reduce the imbalance, because since all the ground truths are multi-class inside the same patch, if we discard some images, we often discard also less represented data. So it's not actually easy to find a balance between the data sets. To analyze this data, we are actually developing a new architecture that we, for the moment, called AgroNet, which is based on the UNet architecture, but it has some different features. For example, it features 3-dimensional convolutions in both the downsampling and on the upsampling path, while it doesn't change the temporal information along the downsampling path, because it is only analyzed during the bottleneck by a convolutional LSTM block that also acts as a temporal attention encoder, since it is propagated along the skip connections. One feature of this network is that it is built using multi-GPU and mixed precision support out of the box, while also enabling deep supervision during training. We trained the model on a cluster called COCA, which is hosted at the University of Ferrara, on a node that hosts 4 NVIDIA V100 GPUs. And we trained the model with a k-folding cross-validation approach with 5 different splits, each one trained for 100 epochs, monitoring the validation death score. And if this metric did not improve for the last 20 epochs, we stopped the training to avoid overfitting. Here we can see the results in terms of segmentation metrics compared to other networks found in the literature, in terms of both die-score, mean intersection over union, and overall accuracy for both datasets, orthoplasticity and Munich. And what we can see is that for the moment, our network obtains results in line with the networks in the literature. So this is, for the moment, is extremely good. And if you look at the results from a visual point of view, we cannot see any particular differences between the predictions of our network compared to the other 2 networks and the ground truths. So the results are actually, for the moment, are okay. So you might ask, why define a completely new architecture when the already established versions are already good enough? Well, looking at the performance in terms of computation results, here we're measuring the throughput in terms of images per second, where one image is an entire satellite image time series. We can see that in terms of throughput, our network is significantly faster than the competitors. This is also because the competitors do not come with multi-GPU support out of the box. So for an external user, it's not always easy to adapt the code to run on multi-GPUs. But we can also see that we are faster than the other competitors, even if we have significantly more free parameters to characterize. And when we run on 4 GPUs, obviously, we achieve up to 6 times the training speed, 6 times the performances of the UTI network. When we look at the performance in terms of scalability of our network along multiple GPUs, we can see that we achieve a nearly linear speed up. So this is actually an indication that the code is written fairly well and it parallelizes well. When we look at the results in terms of inferences, so the number, because this is what matters to the end user, we can see that our network is already faster in single precision, not only in mixed precision. And when we go also here in multi-GPU, using a multi-GPU, we achieve up to 27 times the throughput of the fastest competitor, which is the UTI. And this is all the results are obtained and measured on the same system. So this is what we are actually doing right now. We are trying to integrate this processor inside MESEO. So the crop classification will be delivered as a Docker image, where the Earth Observation Coordination Center will, once it receives the request from the end user, it will run the crop classification use case, passing to it an XML file that contains the request ID, the area where we want to make the analysis, and a list of the images for which we want to analyze. Then the processor will retrieve the data, preprocess it, so we normalize the resolution of the bands, especially if we are using Sentinel-2 images, because the different bands have different resolutions. We crop to the images to the area of interest, and then we select which model we want to apply the crop classification with. So because obviously we train 2 different models, one for France and one for Germany. Then we perform the inference. If the area is big enough, we apply a patch, we subdivide the image in patches, and then we reconstruct the images during the post-processing step, while also creating the vectorized predictions. And finally, we deliver the zip of the results containing also the QML style file in order for the product to be seen on the exploitation tools. So as far as next steps goes, we are trying to further refine the AI model and also tune the hyperparameters. Then we are also investigating if it is possible to use shorter time series for our analysis, because as we can see from the picture below, we have tried to apply the model on a small area around Munich, but with the data collected in 2019. And for this area, with the constraints on the cloud coverage amount, we were able to only obtain 11 images, which apparently it is not enough for our model to predict anything valuable. In fact, what we can see from these images is that the results are still not good enough when applied to a real case scenario where the data is not as good as the one seen during the training. Then we are trying to integrate data from different satellites in our application. So we are trying to use JSAT data in the model to train the model, and then to generalize the model on different areas. So for what concerns this is a summary of what we did. What we learned is that the AI methods are an extremely valuable tool to perform crop classification because they are fast and they are reliable because they produce accurate maps. We just need to know the exact constraints in order to perform, to achieve good results with small time series. But then we can also see that the spatial crop maps that we generate can be used for further, more in-depth studies, for example, to address the climate change, estimate the crop yields, because the availability of ground truth data, it is often not not every country make available ground truth data in order to know what is growing where. So the possibility to have predictions on countries where this kind of data is not available can also help the agencies to know and monitor this kind of situations. So for what we did, we are developing a new AI model to analyze multispectral, multitemporal satellite data. We are trying to adapt it to different data sets. So we have actually a pipeline in the working that takes an input data coming from a satellite, and if there are the ground truths available, is able to create a training data set. And we achieve high segmentation accuracy compared to the status of the art, but while also being significantly faster than the status of the art. As a reminder, MESEO is still a prototype, so the results are still not public. And we hope to combine the elements of an end-to-end system that is able to host multiple missions. So these kind of applications will be able to be done with data coming from different satellites. With this, I finished my presentation. I hope it was clear enough and it was not boring. And I'm open for questions if there are any. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Your presentation was clear and not boring. And in fact, there are a lot of questions. So have a glass of water if you want.
Okay, thank you.
And then we'll get started with the questions that have come on the chat during your presentation. First of all, there was a request to share the dataset links. So as Andrea said, obviously some of the final results of MESEO are not ready yet, but the datasets perhaps.
The dataset are already available. Mm-hmm. For example, the one that we reconstructed is not yet available on a repository because we are still working on it. We have to be sure that everything is fine. But mm-hmm. If you want to have the links for the original datasets, for example, here is the link for the Munich dataset.
Okay.
And instead, this one is the one for the PASTIS dataset. Okay.
Perhaps we could ask our back office who also has the presentation, to copy the links and put them in the chat for Rohan. Thank you very much for that. And moving on with the question. So Pedro asks, does your methodology consider the change detection?
Well, this is a good question, because what we actually aim to observe with our model is the change in the evolution of the crops. So we are not actually looking at addressing if a crop field is destined for anything else during the year, because the ground truths is only is only a map of what is harvested during the month of September. So if anything changed before, we are not able to identify the change. But from some tests that we did, with also the different models, because I obtained the results also for the other two models, there are some crop fields that no model is able to actually predict correctly. So what I'm guessing is that there are also some issues in the declarations that the crop agencies have submitted, or something happened during the year. So maybe a crop field was constructed after the period of the acquisitions, or something like that, but we do not take into account the change effects.
Okay, thank you very much, Pedro. I hope that answers your question. And Branko asks, did you consider domain shift in data distribution? And how would you suggest to solve this on the fly when the system is integrated into the MESEO platform?
I'm not sure what you mean with domain shift. So if you're able to explain it a bit better.
Okay, so Branko, if you could put in the chat exactly what that means, and in the meantime, I will go on to the next question, which is Chloe. That's fine. Which is Chloe, who asks, what are the minimum requirements for the number of images in the time series that you to be used to train your model?
Okay, so for now, we are training the model using all the available images that are available in the two datasets. So for the pastis, up to 61 images, and for Munich, up to 52. But as I said, we are trying to reduce this amount. And what we have found in the recent tests was that it is not always required to use the full time series of a full year, but we just need data from when the crop is planted up to when it's harvested. So more or less always between January and July, or January to August. And we might need at least one observation per week to observe any meaningful change in the crop, especially from spring to summer, because it is when most of the crops have the most of their change. So we might actually try to train a model using a reduced time series and see if what the changes are in terms of segmentation metrics, and also how they react to data coming not from the dataset, but from a different data source. But we expect them to be a bit better, because it is actually difficult to have 61 observations for a single area.
Okay, thank you very much. Branko has integrated the question saying that it was referring to data distributions of training data. Does that help you to answer his question, which was, let me just get back up and remind you. Did you consider the domain shift in data distribution then referring to your training data?
Well, I don't know if I understand your question correctly, but more or less, because obviously the most abundant crop classes have an higher segmentation metrics, because you are actually evaluating the crops on the basis of each crop has its own segmentation metric, and then we average them all together to achieve a single value. And obviously, the most abundant crop classes performs better, but this is also dependent on how the crop classes are different between each other. Because, for example, if we are monitoring potatoes, even if we have less pixels that cover the class potatoes, they are actually pretty different from other crop classes, and they usually perform pretty well, even if the data set is scarce for their class. I hope that I answered your question, that I understood it correctly, more or less, more than.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, Branko can let us know in the chat if you answered correctly or not, and I'll move on to the next one, which comes from Dragana, who asks also questions about how you trained your model. So, for example, you trained it on a specific region. Can it be used with other regions? You trained it on Sentinel-2.
Okay.
Can it be trained with other data from other satellites?
Okay, so yeah, we trained the model on 2 different areas. One is France and the other is Germany. And what we noticed was that it was not exactly possible to apply the model trained on France on the data collected in Germany and expect to have to know exactly what is found on the ground, because we have no ground truth equivalent for the data in Munich, because the ground truths for France and Germany are different. So if we apply the model trained on an area on the other area, we are not sure if what we are looking at it's correct. What I can say is that also for the application of this network in another project that is on Italy, we actually had to train 3 different models depending on the latitude that we are working on, because the differences in climate also imply differences in the crop distribution. So it is extremely difficult to have a generalized model for all the crops. What we can do is to reduce the number of the crops that we want to analyze to maybe only a selected few that are always present, for example, cereals, soybeans, and cotton. And that model could be generalized. But if we want to have a more in-depth view of different crop classes, we actually have to make different models, each one specific for their region, because obviously different countries also have different dietary habits given by the climate. Depending on for the second part, yeah, we use data of Sentinel-2. We are trying to train a model also using JSAT data. At the moment, it is not exactly easy, also because we are still receiving the data, but we are trying to train a model on Austria. And for the moment, the results are not as good, but this is just because of the amount of data that we are currently using. But again, if it is difficult to have a model trained, for example, on Sentinel-2 data and perform the inference with data coming from another source, because the spatial resolution on ground is different, and also the spectral bands might not be exactly the same. So the reflectances that we observe are different. And for that reason, the response of the crops might be a bit different. So it's a tricky question. We plan to address this in the future versions of the network, but we probably will still go with different models, one for each satellite, for each region.
Okay, thank you, Andrea, and thank you, Dragana, for your tricky question. I hope it's been answered. Another tricky question for you. But first of all, a thank you for an excellent and very clear presentation about a very impressive system. So Felicity says, accepting that the objective for end users is to say what crops are being formed, as a biologist, she would like to know what aspects of the spectral signals that go into your model are the most important to distinguish between given species. So for example, could you envisage that later, as the system becomes more developed, you might be able to use it to distinguish, for example, between healthy and diseased crops? I told you it was tricky.
Yeah, I think it's a bit difficult for this kind of application, because as I said earlier, this kind of data has not infinite resolution. So it is not exactly easy to understand the health of the crop, but it is something that can be introduced down the line. Maybe, for example, we can produce crop maps at different stages during the year. I don't think that during the year, but starting, for example, from June, because previously to June, I don't think that anything meaningful can be observed, and look how the different crop fields change during the year. So for example, we produce crop maps from June, then we produce another crop map observing the data up to July, then to August, and so on. And looking at all the time series of the prediction, maybe we can understand something about what is going on the ground. But I'd say that it is out of the scope of the crop classification project as of now, but it is actually something that we can keep in mind and try to integrate something similar in the future. We have to investigate if it is feasible to do, but it is actually something that is really important to know.
Okay, thank you very much for another excellent answer and a new research project perhaps coming out of that.
Yeah, might be.
I don't see any more questions on the chat. I'll give you participants just a couple more seconds to see if anyone else wants to post any further questions to Andrea. Okay, nothing coming up for the moment, which is fair enough because you've already done a lot of work. So I will take the time, and please do feel free if any other questions come up, you can still jump in and interrupt me. But for now, I would like to say thank you to all of you for having joined us. Thank you, of course, to Andrea for having taken the time to explain to us about this system that's being developed. This was the last in the specific series of webinars. As I said, we did 3, but there are many other ways that you can continue to be informed about the MESEO project. So you can find all the updated information on our website and on our social media, and you will find in a second the links to those on the chat. We're also very keen to engage with stakeholders because, you know, part of what this research project is about is developing a sort of a iterative feedback process. So as I mentioned in the last webinar, we will be holding a stakeholder workshop next year for the full pre-operational demonstration, which will be designed to collect further feedback on project innovations, and then maybe make some adaptations before we arrive at the final prototype. So anyone that is interested in contributing and being involved and being updated about this can write to us and let us know. And again, we'll put the email in the chat. But while that is happening, I noticed that Rohan has said that there is a quick question. So please feel free, Rohan, to post it. And I'm sure Andrea will be delighted to answer.
Yeah.
I assume it's for Andrea, not for me. Okay, so this is perhaps connected to the previous question because it's talking about that they're working on a crop health monitoring. Would Andrea think it's feasible to use image segmentation?
Well, I'd say that it depends on what kind of instrument you're using, but for my experience, okay.
So using HSI.
That means hyperspectral imaging. Okay,
yes.
yeah.
Okay.
So for your specific application, I think that it is best to perform a study on the evolution of the spectral signatures on the spectrum along the year, just to know, because from an image segmentation point of view, I don't think that you have the resolution, especially if you're using satellite images, to observe the differences in the health of the crops. I think it is better to integrate your data with also data coming from the soil, because you can know about the content of the water on the ground, and with that you can also estimate if the crops are starved or they're healthy. So I guess maybe an analysis on the spectral signature is actually better. But I don't know, because it is not exactly my field, so I might have said something completely wrong.
Okay, well, in that case, I would suggest,
MCU.
Rohan, that you write to the address that's been put on the website if you want any further information, and we can put you back in contact with Andrea and with his colleagues, and I'm sure they'd be happy to provide much further information on that. This time I really don't see any more questions in the chat, so I'll say one last thing, which is that here at MESEO, in addition to telling people like yourselves, experts and people working in related fields, we're also keen to let the younger generations know about this kind of sort of scientific progress. And so for anyone here that has children or grandchildren or nieces and nephews, you can have a look also at the MESEO website for the kids section. We have a section specifically for them, and we also have a podcast which has 3 episodes about the MESEO projects and sort of translating the use of satellite images to a younger audience. So please do feel free to visit the website and have a look at that. So I think that really is it for now. Thank you again to all of you that have joined us today and perhaps even followed all 3 of the webinars. It's been a pleasure to have you here. Thank you again to Andrea for your time and your answers.
Thank you.
And have a very, very happy evening to everybody. Goodbye.
Goodbye.